Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rusty Berg. I'm coming to you from here somewhere in southeast Michigan from the Antique Automotive Acres, where the future of the automobile is not today. We're back to working on my 1914 Studebaker SC-4. I've got a show coming up in South Bend, Indiana, the home of the headquarters of the Studebaker Corporation, who made this car, coming up in about a month, not even a month, a couple weeks now, first week of May. Check your local listings when you see this. I've got to get some work done on this car before I take it down there. Primarily, what I'm going to be focusing on today in this video is extracting the water pump here. This is the original water pump for the car, and it's got a pretty bad leak when it's running. The cross shaft seal that drives the impeller is it's packed with a graphite material, a graphite packing material, and it's leaking past that graphite packing material, which indicates to me that the original bushings that the shaft actually rides on inside are worn out and they need repair. So today we're going to be, the scope of this video today is going to be me extracting this out of the car, and getting down that path of getting it repaired so it's back, that I can take it back out on the road for the show, because I've got about a couple weeks worth of time to get the job done. So with that, why don't we go ahead and get things started. So I deployed my handheld camera just to maybe bring you in close to see what exactly I'm going to be extracting out of this car, give you an idea of how this is actually working in this engine, because it is a bit of a unique layout. So and for those of you who haven't seen the introductory video of this car, I think my last video, I go over a bit of the overview of Studebaker, the company, a little bit about the history of this car itself, and we actually, instead of stringing it out like I did on the Rio, I actually do go ahead and start it. This car is running and driving. The problem really is that while it's running, water is leaking past the shaft, which reduces the amount of coolant capacity I have in the radiator. And if I go on long drives with this car, which I've done some touring with this car before, I end up almost putting in as much water through the radiator as I do gasoline through the engine, because it does leak that water out pretty quickly. So but just as a plug again, if you want to go back, look at that last video, we go over the overview of the car, and I do actually get it started so you can hear that mighty Studebaker four-cylinder roar into life. So back into the engine bay. So the water pump we're extracting, I've pointed it out a couple times, but what's kind of unique about it is this is it here. So the inlet is down here. That's where the water comes in through the radiator. It passes through this housing and then is flung out this pipe and through the cylinder of the head of the engine, the cylinder's top end head portion of the engine to take the heat out. But what's kind of unique is, if you'll notice, the rotational axis of this pump is 90 degrees from what modern engines typically have, where it's driven by your fan belt. This is actually driven, as you can kind of see as I move in, it's driven by this shaft here, which is actually driven by the camshaft gear. It's a 90-degree bevel drive gear inside that drives not only this this water pump, but it also drives the distributor here for timing the ignition. So when you take this whole top end assembly apart, it's very critical you keep the engine timing in mind. We won't have to do that today, because you can actually extract the water pump off of the engine without having to untime the gears, and then I would have to go back and retime them. But you can see here the jam nut on the outside is for tightening that water pump packing. You can see it's coated in the packing material that's wearing out. This is the drive shaft here. I'll bring you in a little closer so you can see that. So that's going through that packing and into the coolant or the water inside here. And when it's spinning, when the engine's running, water is dripping out. You can kind of see it collecting down below and leaking out of the engine while it's running. So the pump is clearly showing some signs of distress. I need to get in there, take the pump out and take a look at it. I think the bushings are probably wallered after 100 and I'm trying to do math in my head again, 108 years, which is not bad, but it's going to need some work. So I'm going to I think what I'm going to do is set the camera up on a tripod and have it watch me as I go through the process of taking the pump out. And if something comes up that's interesting, I'll bring you back in again to take a look. So the first step of pulling the water pump out of this car is to drain the fluids out. You got to break open the petcock on the radiator and also on the pump because it is a little bit above the outlet. And then while waiting, you got to get yourself a delightful beverage just to while the time away as the water comes out. You see me climb into the back of the car. There's an area under the back seat for the toolkit. That's where I keep some bigger open-ended wrenches and adjustable wrenches, which I use to tighten the water pump packing nut and also fits on the nuts that hold the pump in. The pump itself is held in really by a mounting nut that goes over where the shaft goes with a jam nut to lock that in place, and then finally the water pump packing nut itself, and then just loosen the hoses up at the clamps, and then with a little bit of wrestling, it'll slide essentially right out of the engine as easy as can be, which you can see right there. Well, there you have it, folks. An extracted 1914 Studebaker SC-4 water pump. What's kind of unique about this pump design is that it's held in place in the car by this collar here, and you might have seen me in the magic of time-lapse photography struggle to get these nuts off. These are what actually hold. They're jam nuts, so instead of being like a lock nut, you tighten one down until you get it a couple Guten tights tight, and then you thread this one down on top of it, and that locks it in place so that it doesn't want to back off while the car is actually running. And then the last nut here is what is known as the packing nut. So you might hold this up to the camera so you can see. Inside here, this is that graphite packing I was talking about. You can still buy this for water pumps today, industrial grade water pump applications. I've got some on my shelf of parts that I use, and it's there to help both lubricate the shaft as it's running and also seal it against the water coming out. This squeezes down as you tighten down this nut on the shaft. It'll squeeze down and make a almost watertight seal. You typically see a little drip every so often, especially when the engine's not running, but in reality this is dripping a whole lot more when the engine actually is running, which is a problem. And the way I could tell and see is this is the shaft that's driving the impeller inside, and I can take it and it really shouldn't move around inside the assembly like it is. It's got probably almost 20 or 30,000, maybe even more side-to-side movement, which is it just means the bushings that are holding it inside are shot. So it's time to take this water pump apart and get in there and rebush it. So I'm going to go ahead and get started taking a pump, show you the inside, show you one of the shade tree fixes I had to do to make this water pump still usable, and we'll do a little further inspection and lay out the course of action for the next steps. Okay, so we're going to tear into this, and I find these little magnetic parts holders are quite handy. This pump it's a clamshell design. There's two halves of it that are held together by these nut and bolt assemblies, so you got to get in there and take them all apart, and it just makes it easier when you have something to drop the bits and pieces into and they don't go bouncing all over creation. So that's the wrong size wrench. I had the right size wrench. What did I do with it? Did I stick it in my pocket? No, there it is. You look right at it and not even comprehend it's there. So start taking these apart. So this is I know at least for the early Studebakers, starting in 1913, they were using a pump similar to this. I don't necessarily know how long they kept using it on their cars. I have a spare engine for my Studebaker, which is a 1915. It's got a similar pump design to it, but it could be that at some point they changed over, although if I had to guess, they probably kept using it for a while, until they switched over to like the Light 6 design in 1919 or 1920. So any Studebaker experts who might actually know that, feel free to put that down in the chat window there. Give me a heads up, I'd like to learn. I do have a spare version of this water pump, but I'd like to try and repair the one I have because it's already had some repair works done to it, and I know it's working really well. So, other than the leaking issues, so I'd like to keep it, keep the car as close to its original as possible. So, but we got to figure out why this thing is suffering so much distress and dripping out everywhere. Phew! Finally. That's a whole lot of screws I had to take out that hold this thing together. But, that's what they had to do to help keep these things watertight. Now, there is a gasket. I used a little bit of sealer between the halves here, so they're still pretty glued shut. Let me go get a chisel, cold chisel, and a hammer will help separate that apart. One cold chisel, one precision adjustment device. Let's split this puppy apart. Just get right in where the surface is, and there we go. Just help to break that gasket sealer up a bit. Instead of a cold chisel, not necessarily a great idea, but folks can use a screwdriver as well. I just happen to have the cold chisels. They're sort of the right tool for this job. There we go. So, there we are. One bushing, and then the secret repair. So years ago, when I first bought this Studebaker, the water pump was in really bad shape. So what I ended up doing was, through a little bit of research and help from my father, we figured out that a Johnson Evinrude rubber boat motor impeller fit perfectly in this housing and has been a fabulous replacement, especially when I didn't have a spare, so I didn't know what the part was supposed to look like. I had a general idea, but the old part, all the fins had folded over, so just based on diameter and height, with a little bit of research, figured out that you can get these off the internet, and it's been working fabulously as a replacement solution for my original impeller, which was destroyed. And what you can kind of see here, if I take the shaft, I can wiggle it back and forth inside the bushings. I don't know if you're going to be able to see that. I'm going to try and hold it up to you, but it's rocking around inside the bushings. You want these running fit is a couple thousandths of an inch clearance so that you want it to spin freely, but you don't want it to rock side to side, mostly because that's going to let the water out. Now, the graphite is in the end of the shaft to help prevent that from happening, but there's only so much you can do. If too much water is coming around it and it's running, there's just really nothing you can do about it. So we got that one, and then let's take a look at the other side. So this is the inlet side. So this is where the water comes from the radiator, and then it comes through here, and then it's spun around by the impeller and forced out the second half into the engine block. So if I take that and that, oh my, that is, that's really bad. I don't know if you can see that. That's very, very bad. So that is completely worn out, which means we're going to have to replace it. And as I look at it, it's going to be an interesting job, because this is a piece of bronze that is cut and milled to let the water in. And it looks like, sorry about the light, folks, I need to get a little bit more light myself just to see that it's a press fit into the housing. So we'll have to extract it very carefully and then machine up a new one. And it looks to be the same for this guy as well. I'll have to see. That one's got a taper on it for the graphite packing to rest against. That's how it tightens up against it. So both of these bushings are going to have to come out. Luckily, I've got the material and hopefully the skill set. We'll find out to make a new one. So I think that's going to wrap it up for the inspection portion of this program. Well, there you have it, folks. We've successfully extracted the water pump from Eleanor, my 1914 Studebaker SC-4. I've pushed her underneath the 4-post lift for a couple reasons. One, it gets her out of the way, opens up the floor of the shop, makes it a little bit easier for me to work on the multiple projects I've got going on. And also, two, excuse me, frog in my throat. Where she was parked is right next to my machining area of the shop, where I'm going to have to start cutting some metal, and I don't want that spraying all over the car or even getting underneath the tires where it might cause some trouble. So it's best that she's tucked out of the way, waiting ever so patiently for me to hurry up and get that water pump put back together again so she can get back out on the road. And you'll see that in an upcoming episode of the Antique Automotive Acres here soon enough. So if you liked what you saw, maybe feel free to give my channel a subscription. Go ahead and like the video. Maybe press that little bell icon there. I hear that does something on the YouTube. Black Magic Analyticals lets you know at least when I post another video, I think. If you got any questions or comments about the Studebaker or what I'm working on in the shop, or anything you saw in the shop as you saw me walking around that you'd like to see more of, feel free to drop a comment in the chat area below. I do make an effort to try and read through and answer those questions as best as I can. And if you got any comments or feedback on how the videos are going, let me know. You know, I've got this new camera I'm still figuring out. I think it's a little bit better, maybe less seasick, maybe not. But feel free to let me know if you like how the new cameras are working out as well. So with that, like, comment, subscribe. Also, in between videos, I am on Instagram at Antique Automotive Acres. Feel free to give that a subscribe as well. I try to post some pictures of what's going on in between videos. And then with that, I think I've said everything I need to say. One of these days, I'll get that ready to rattle right off the top of my head. But for now, I still got to think through it each and every time. Well, hopefully I'll be able to rattle it off my head. I need to keep this thing going. So with that, I thank you very much for watching. Cheers, and we'll see you next time.